and I've set up my built-in administrator account, I'll press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to sign in. In VMware Workstation, Ctrl-Alt-Delete won't work, so you'll press Ctrl-Alt-Insert. On a physical machine, you would press Ctrl-Delete. I'll type in my password that I set up for my account, and I'll be signed in. The Server Manager window will open, giving me an overview of my server. From here, we've successfully installed Windows Server onto a virtual machine, and from here we can begin to set up our environment. Now that we have a working Windows Server 2012 installation, our next step is to create a Windows domain. Well, what is a Windows domain? A Windows domain is a computer network where user accounts, computers, and resources, and the security for all those things are stored and defined on one or more servers that are called domain controllers. Users and computers on the domain are authenticated through the domain controllers, and the permissions to the resources are based on user accounts and the groups that contain user accounts. So with that information in mind, it's time to set up our Windows Server as a domain controller and create our first domain. For the remainder of this course, I'm going to be using VMware Workstation in full screen mode. At the very top of the window, you can see the Enter Full Screen Mode button. To exit full screen mode, simply move your cursor to the top and click the full screen mode button again. This will help us to be able to see what we're doing inside the window. When we first start up Windows Server and log in, we should see the Server Manager utility. The Server Manager utility allows us to get an overview of the different roles and configurations that we've set up for our local server, as well as servers that we've added to any groups within the domain once we've created it. If you don't see the Server Manager window when you first log into Windows, you can access it through the Quick Launch toolbar or through the Start menu. There are some preliminary steps that we need to set up in order to make our domain controller active and working properly. We can go up to Configure this local server to set some of these options. First, we need to give our server a name. In the top left-hand corner, you can see that I've already set a name for my server. If I click the name, I can change it. It'll open the System Properties menu. I can click Change, and from here I can change my server's name. Once I click OK and confirm my changes, I'll need to restart the server in order to save the change. We'll also want to make sure that Windows updates are turned on. The Windows Update settings, when you click them, will show you what your current settings are. I've already turned mine on, and it's always a good idea to keep your server up to date with the latest patches. This prevents any vulnerabilities or any bugs from occurring that would impact user experience. We'll also want to make sure that our time zone and our time are set correctly. I prefer setting up an internet time server so that Windows can sync with an external source. There are some built-in options for time servers, which you can use, or you can use one of your own if you're familiar with the protocol. I also want to make sure that my time zone is set correctly. There are some other options on the left-hand side that we'll want to configure as well. The defaults for Windows Firewall, Remote Management, and Remote Desktop will be fine for now. NIC teaming is an option that allows you to combine different physical network interfaces to one IP address. We'll skip that for now since that's a more advanced feature. We do need to configure a static IP address for this server. Since it's going to be a domain controller, its IP address must not change. If it does, that could cause some problems in the future. So let's go ahead and configure a static IP address now. When we click our current configuration within Server Manager, we'll be presented with a list of our current Ethernet adapters. This server only has one since that's what we configured as a typical configuration in VMware. If I right-click this and click Status and then Details, it'll show you the current IP address and IP settings that have been given by the DHCP server built into VMware. We need to change this so that this information is static and will not change. So I'm going to make a quick note of my IP address, my gateway, as well as the DNS server. Now I'll go into Properties, open up IP Protocol version 4, and instead of Obtain IP address automatically, I'll use the following IP address and enter that information I took from before. Once I've entered my settings, you can click OK. Now we've prepared our server with the basic settings that will allow it to become a domain controller.